player will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Cloud character review. A day early, a couple days early here, because I know that he'll be coming any day now, and I wanted to hit the ground running, making sure everyone had my opinion as early as possible for the decision making on whether you pull and how you build him and how you rush him, if you do pull him, and all of those things. But today's character overview, pretty standard things. It's the overview, the whole stat analysis, the report card, a new player snapshot, and some of my thoughts if you have a relatively new account, if he's a good addition to it. My general thoughts, kind of encapsulating a lot of high-level concepts. We'll go through the job then with the passives, the counters, the auto abilities, and the priority. We'll look at the TMR, just to gauge whether or not pulling him for the TMR alone might be a good investment. The job-based vision card eligibility, some general optimization, 2 different sample builds, and Truststones, jam-packed to dive into many of our favorite protagonists in all of Final Fantasy. So Cloud, brand new light unit added to the game. They've given him the Determined Soldier unique main job with Great Knight and Knight as the sub-jobs. He does equip great swords and armors, helms, and accessories, so a little bit of a heavier equip type overall. He does have a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit, and I do recommend 50 faith for him. I really don't see much upside going any higher than that. He does have a max range of 5 squares away on that main job with 2 AoE abilities and 2 unit scaling abilities. From a resistance perspective, 20% to slash. He's got positive 15% to magic, 10% to pierce, 0 to missile, and the minus 10% to strike. So obviously be a little cognizant of that when you see any kind of strike units in the fold. From an ailment perspective, 50% to frostbite and paralyze. The frostbite one is certainly nice, where we know Tifa is coming in with that. You also have that 10% to stun. Helps a little bit in that potential VV matchup if that's still a problem wherever you're playing. But overall, 50 faith, I'm not terribly concerned about many of these status afflictions. And for his mastery ability, they gave him 40 reaction block rate permanently and 10% reduced physical damage of all physical damage types. The Dream ability, he got 15 AoE res and 20 slash res pen permanently. Really like what they did overall with both of these upgrades. Now, from a base HP and base stat perspective, again, this is, I'm going to go through this quickly because we're seeing the Power Creep 4th anniversary, where when you look at these units compared to all the units in the game, very noticeable now how far ahead they are. And Cloud is no exception to that, coming in here very high at this 4368 base HP. He is among one of the highest attack stats in the game here too, at that 464, certainly competitive with the newer units that have been released. From a agility perspective, at 60 base agility, definitely in a higher bucket than most characters end up being, where, you know, when you add those vision cards in, it does end up rounding up a couple percentage points when you are at that 60. His dexterity, a little bit above average, nothing crazy, but certainly above the median. I think he's in a healthy spot for where, you know, your average crit damage dealing is. From a luck perspective, also a bit above average, maybe not to the degree that we are used to with some of these units, but 188 is still well above that 75th percentile, well above where most units end up. That's obviously a good starting spot for me personally. And then the total stat analysis, when we look at those base stats, kind of transforming those charts into one relative where he falls to other units, you know, that attack stat does stand out. That base attack is among some of the highest you can get. Overall, well-rounded, in my opinion, all 5 of these. And when you include the total stats with the mastery ability, the board nodes, he only gets better, quite honestly. They were very generous with the dexterity and the luck on the board, giving him 88 of each. They bulked him up a little bit more with the 15% HP on the board nodes. He still gets a fair amount of attack here to remain relatively competitive. Overall, very happy with where the total stats end up innately. No surprise that he is among the tops in all of them, where we see a lot of these newer units. And when we look at agility now with those sub and main vision cards to really see where you can min-max his agility, he is right there, virtually tied for the fastest in the game. It's a rounding issue, but he's basically at 90 to 91 total agility with these. He does have a passive that can increase his agility, so, you know, without that passive, he still comes in at 84, which is very, very good. And again, if you were to bucket him here relative to other units, damn near top of the charts, essentially top of the charts for both with and without passive. Certainly in a really good spot for having not only fast agility, but being able to decide whether or not you want to turn that passive on or off and still be relatively speedy, all things considered. When we look at the crit hit rates here, you know, same with the dexterity, kind of right middle of the pack here. I don't think it's necessarily a strength, but most certainly not a weakness. You just kind of have to build around it a little bit. And the crit avoidance rate, nothing crazy here. That above average luck stat does amplify it by a couple percentage points, but really, realistically, the difference between 55 760 is not game changing from a crit avoidance perspective. Now for the accuracy, this is where, they gave him some good innate accuracy because of the power creep where his luck and dexterity stat end up. But when you do compare him to units that can equip passives, which he has no accuracy boosting passives, he does fall behind a fair bit, but he does have a very strong guaranteed hit, so I'm not terribly worried about the accuracy. You'll probably still want to build in a little bit of it, but it's not going to take much just to get him to like a bare minimum functioning place to be. And the evasion, similar to many of these new units, because of that high luck stat, he's technically on this gradient where you could consider someone a semi-evade unit, but when you put him toe-to-toe with all these new units, like Jeume, like other Clouds and Sephiroths and A2s, there really isn't any kind of true evasion potential. If you're playing in a place where maybe people aren't gearing for it, you catch them off guard, maybe, but nowadays the bar for being a semi-evade unit is much higher than what this chart typically has meant historically. But as we move on to the report card here, overall effective HP, and this is again purely based off his HP, his innate AoE and AoE wide resistances, things like that, the HP level itself, it's an S tier. He is literally only behind Grifford for all DPS in the game based off how I grade this for innate effective HP. A lot of this is due to the AoE wide resistance where he can get up to 25% innately, 40% with his weapon and TOR item. He's got 15 AoE res innately and just a very good HP stat with some very good resistances overall. The survivability, I'm going with a B plus here. He does have a very strong 25% physical damage reduction, and he does have Shell, which is also 25% reduction of magic damage, and he can protect that shell. This might be worded a little confusingly. I meant to imply, though, that he can protect his shell from being dispelled. That's what I meant it to be. He does not have protect for himself. But he does have his 7,500 HP magic barrier, 25 unit res on a buff. He is courage capable, but there is no other kind of like physical barrier that we're used to seeing, and there's really no any kind of health regen or heal back or anything, so the survivability is a little bit lackluster compared to others, but overall he does have other tools to mitigate the damage coming his way, but we'll talk about that more soon. The damage, I think, is an A plus here. Easy, innate, 60 slash res pen, 40 defense pen. You can push those to 80 and 100. I'm sorry, you can push those to 180. I have that flipped. 100 slash res pen and 80 defense pen, respectively, as well with his passives. Great AoE penetration, which is new to the game. Yes, he can penetrate AoE resistance, and he does have AoE wide dispel, that new buff that we've been seeing more as of late. His limit break increases his damage, and he's got physical barrier break on the sub job in addition to the limit break as well. Agility is an A plus here. Again, 84 agility versus the average of 78. When you start equipping passives, it's 91 versus 81. 91 is as fast as you can get innately. Really love that aspect of him. The agility is certainly 2 thumbs up. The accuracy is a C plus here. The accuracy does need work virtually at the average, but the 100% hit chance is on a very good ability. So in practice, I don't think it's going to be a massive game changer for him. The evasion is a B here. The evade potential is there when gearing for it. Might be a little high. I might run down to a B minus here, but we have to kind of rethink these hit rates with the power creep of the accuracy in the game. I think this is slightly misleading at the moment when you put him toe-to-toe with the newer units that are released. Now the movement, also going with a B here. That move plus 1 passive is attached to the agility percent up, so I do think you'll often use this, so I do like that movement versatility for him. The auto ease of use is an A minus for me. The team building is very easy for both light and greatsword. The AI, very easy. The dispels that he has helps kind of reduce like the mental math of trying to figure out damage calculations and stuff. It works just very well without a ton of thought. The game perception for me is an A plus because I think he's a huge pull for many, not only because of light, but because he's Cloud, because it's 7. I think he's both very good for greatsword and light. The power creep stats are justified. I think just off the fact that most people are pulling him, he's going to end up disrupting the game for many, just based off the popularity alone, regardless of my thoughts on the character evaluation. Now, the passives are also an A plus here. Exceptionally good passives for a variety of builds. We'll dive into those soon. The counters, B plus here. He's got a very good slash damage reduction counter, but a little bit niche outside of that. So against slash damage, okay, not a whole ton there. The overall job and kit, A for me. Overall, good abilities, good utility, not perfect, but very sound. And the final grade for me is an A. I think he's a nice upgrade for light and greatsword. I think he does need some team synergy to really help him hit his ceiling, but he's a well-rounded brawler unit. I think he's got enough that a lot of people will still get good value out of him. I don't think he's a meta-defining unit on his own. I don't think he's going to really have a ton of like carry potential like Jeume has or Mont has with his haste and follow-up attacks and stuff. But I think he's a unit that's going to last the test of time time, at least for a while, more than your average unit does. And so I like him from that perspective. And now for the new player thoughts, the pull verdict for me is a thumbs up. The light permanent pool units are overall a great safe investment. Helen of the Black Rose, Wing Stern, the Lucio unit, which you get for free, you can build him up. Engelbert and Jaden are definitely older, but for a new player, they are certainly serviceable for the roles they bring. And there's a lot of roles within the light element that they have physical damage dealers and tanks and some decent role overlap with evade units and accurate units. There's a lot there that you can build off of, and the vision cards are absolutely workable. Bahamut and Dark Bahamut are still two of the best vision cards in the game. The Jaden vision card is fine too. The Greatsword team for a new player, a little more dicey, where the Greatsword permanent pool units are very underwhelming. Bronwell, Rain, Hio, none of these units are making any waves anywhere. The vision card support certainly is there. I think there are some good vision cards to be had. And so to me, like, light in particular is always a relatively safe element for newer players. If you're getting an account up and running, I think it's overall a solid pick for you. Greatsword right now is at its peak, and so if you are kind of a new unit coming in, or a new player coming in, you've missed out on some of these units like A2 and her vision card and the agility percent cards that have come out, and the Hollow Vessel, the MR raid card, if you have none of those. If you've missed on some of that, you might be a little bit too late to the party, but even if you're not fully invested, I do think he has some stable value as a light slasher. As a new player, I'd recommend really going after one, maybe two of the Advent Children units. Cloud, I think, is justifiably one of them. I think Sephiroth is the other one. But you just got to be cognizant of the fact that they are limited units, so you have this window that you have to kind of get as much as you can for them. It should be about 4 to 6 weeks, so you do have some time, but the slow build component isn't as much there for a new player, where normally you might use your Viz into some of the more permanent pool units or just chase some vision cards for a while. But overall, I think it's relatively safe for a new player. And so my general thoughts, diving a smidge deeper here, the penetrations are absolutely on point. The slash res pen, 20 from the mastery ability, 40 from his passive that you'll have on all the time, in my opinion. You could get 40 from another passive that would put him at 100 permanently. You also could get 40 on a buff on a subjob ability. You also have two different vision cards here, the Pinnacle Ever Far and the Final Fantasy XIV Scions card, which is a mono light card that offer you 35% in the main slot or 18% in the sub slot. So you are a lot of different ways here to maintain 100% slash res pen uptime. Definitely 2 thumbs up. And the defense pen, you could get 40 from that passive. You could theoretically equip a second passive for another 40. He does have access to that. The Hio vision card, that's the Greatsword card, has 10 defense pen bestowed on it. You also have your Truststone passive, which I didn't even talk about for the slash res pen, but defense pen, you can get a Truststone passive for another 10 defense pen. You also go for Ultros, which has those 20. There's a lot of different ways to get additional defense pen that I think both of these very sound for what he needs to be at to compete. And there's not many other ways to mitigate his damage output, quite frankly. He can dispel the AoE wide buff with one of his main abilities there. He can dispel general buffs with another ability that if you have AoE res or slash res, something to that effect, you can get rid of those. He can also dispel protect on hit for himself. He also has AoE res penetration to get his brand new in-game mechanic where he, just like all the other penetrations, he will ignore a certain percent of your AoE resistance, which obviously means that you can't just load up on AoE resistance either. He does have an AoE barrier break on the subjob for physical damage and a single target barrier break on the limit break, so even barriers are a little bit at risk against him. And his single target ability is a 25 unit imperil just for that hit, but still it's a 25 imperil on that unit resistance. So there's not a lot of ways that you can like mitigate the damage that he's trying to do to you. But yeah, he has damage, he's going to do it. Now, he doesn't have any innate self-sustain. I think this is super noteworthy, which is hugely irregular compared to many recent units. Most units have either a heal back mechanic or a damage absorb mechanic. Some of them do have regen, some of them do have other stuff where they can heal themselves or a teammate, like a sequence ability, but he's got none, literally 0 innate healing in the kit. So you will want to consider that when you are team building around him to some degree. Don't sleep on his shell and magic barrier though, the HP barrier, because it does help against a lot of these magic tanks and magic scaling DPS like Gilgamesh, which was just announced in JP. But yeah, you have Oldoa, you have Volk, you have Dario for these magic scaling tanks. Obviously like Raph and Dialdo are in there where you might not think we're in a magic meta, but that's still magic damage. And so that shell and barrier does help him against those units to help reduce some of that chip damage. He does have status effect access, but I wouldn't use it personally. He does have access to Berserk and Silence and Disable. It's at the lowered 25% hit chance, and I don't think the 97 Faith for him is worth it, quite frankly, to expose himself to other kinds of status effects from people. So it's there. What's whatever. Great PvE chainer. If you're trying to build up your light cast, he does have a triple hit on the main job, 2 different double hits on the sub job. He does have a 30% light imperil, but for real PvE min-maxers, you want that 38% light imperil. So his imperil isn't quite there, but when you consider the power creep of his attack stat, I do think that for those of you that want to dabble in more PvE, he is a solid thumbs up from that perspective, from a max score perspective in that light chain team. He could be a TMR user as well. I think he's got an interesting second buff on Great Knight that we'll talk about as well. That's a Dispel of the AP Restore, which you've seen so prevalently as of late. We'll talk about more and why in the ability overview. And then finally, the future Trials of Reckoning item could be a best in slot accessory for him. I think it is, and so I have it on my sample builds. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. But diving into the job itself, again, these are unfortunately all the Japanese translated or Google translated versions of the name, so these will be a little bit different than when he gets released, but I want to get through this ahead of time. This first one here is an exceptional passive. 25% reduction of AoE damage the wider the AoE. Very strong stat to have innately. He's got both 40 defense pen and 40 slash res pen on here. This will always be on no matter what. And after that, you really have your pickings here. My personal favorites are Great Knight's Tips. That's the 24% attack and the 40 defense pen. But the agility 12% and move +1 is very competitive as a second option. I think in my gut I prefer the agility one, but I think you could interchangeably use either of them. I think the Knight's Knowledge is fine too. You still get that HP of 15% and the 40 slash res pen. Very competitive too. I think it's just one of those things that really depends on your enemy and what they have for penetrations. But the fact that he can use any of them, depending on what you're trying to do matchup wise, I think is a very strong thing that most characters don't get access to. For the counter abilities, this Blade Guard, it's a 70% chance proc rate against slash and missile damage to reduce the damage by 40%. Now for slash type damage, I love this. It's just a chance to take a flat 40% less damage. The missile damage I'm not as concerned about. You obviously don't see that damage type as often anymore, but 70% chance to proc is very, very high. It is a good form of survivability in those slash mirror matchups, which we are seeing so much of as of late. The other two, though, very average, very mundane. I'm not in love with either of them. Now, when we get to the main job buffs, his priority buff is his teammate buff. This grants himself Shell, it grants himself Courage, 25% physical damage reduction, and 25 unit res, and Dispel Protect as long as you have your Courage or Shell active. So there's a lot of things there from a teammate buff that I like what he gives specifically to himself. Shell to a teammate is certainly nice too. But the second buff here, this is where things get a little niche for me. This is a good second buff. It's 7500 HP Magic Barrier. It's a 40% attack buff, and upon hit for 3 turns, you can seal shell removal to enemies. Now here's the thing. When you're not in a magic meta or you're not really scared of the magic damage from some of these tanks, I think you could turn this buff off because I don't think it really offers anything. I don't really think it offers anything. You could easily put a TMR in here or the Great Knight buff, which we'll talk about in a second. But this one I think is debatable whether you need it on. I still love the buff, but this is one that really is kind of like meta dependent on whether you get the full upside of your second turn or not. Now, when we get to the main job offensive, all 4 of these abilities are slash oriented, they're light oriented. They scale off 120% of his attack stat. Overall, the 2 that I think are most noteworthy are the bottom ones here. This third one here, the untranslated effect is an AoE res penetration of 40, so he'll get 60 AoE res penetration when you add in his weapon, which has 20. It's the 100% hit chance. It's a triple hit. It also removes the AoE wide resistance buff of physical type damage. This is an excellent ability. And the fourth ability here is also very good, where it's the general dispel. And it is also, unfortunately, again, a mistranslation, but this secondary effect here is that all buffs for 3 turns of that unit will be cut in half. So if they had a buff that was like, I don't know, 25% slash res, it'd only be 12% slash res because you're reducing the efficiency by half. You get same kind of thing for healing power buffs or penetration buffs. All very good things that between these 2 abilities, I love what he has to offer. The other ones are fine too, to be honest. I don't love the lower AP one, but I like the second one here where you get that unit in peril. Very strong modifiers here. All three of these abilities are 200% modifiers. Kind of irregular to see that on a main job, but overall, 2 thumbs up. And obviously good range versatility too with a square type and a cross type and a single target. I like what they did from a balance perspective. And the limit break, this is a very interesting one. This is a physical barrier break. It's 20% increased damage for 3 turns. It's a reduction of the enemy's chain resistance of 50. This obviously will add up that as they take more hits, specifically slash type damage, they will take more damage because of it. So kind of nice for like a tank busting perspective, and it's a flat 10 AP to himself as well. The cool thing about this ability, it's range height 3, very irregular. Not only because most of these range heights don't A, get up to a height of 3, that's irregular in itself, but B, none of his main job is even close to a height of 3. So I like what they did here, particularly because he's not a buff heavy unit, that if you do have some weird height irregularities, it's not going to stop him from using this limit break early to get that damage up time up early, to get that AP early, to still get the utility of the barrier break. I think this is very smart what they did by adding the range height in here. Now we get to the sub jobs. This one, I don't love this determined soldier sub job. This is the berserk one. It's just too limited in range. The damage is frankly subpar to the damage on the main job. Double assault is also okay, I guess, but I still prefer the main job. To me, I think Great Knight is really the best part of this kit to have as a sub job, because I do like this buff here that should you decide to disable that HP magic barrier, you could dispel AP restore for 3 turns and not have to use the Veritas TMR, for instance. So I do like this as a buff on hit, but even the rest of this, I do like the decreased light res here on a double hit. I think this is a great, even though it's a strike type ability, I do like what this has to offer. And then the AoE physical barrier break here I think is really great, that not only is it on the limit break, but you now have it on demand here in the sub job. I think this is the best sub job by a good margin. The Knight one, this one's okay. The only upside I see here for me personally is the Trinity break, where I do like the access to the extra 40 slash res pen if you wanted to forego the passive, maybe forego a vision card. It's the kind of thing that probably comes in handy, particularly with the attack magic and agility break at those values that they are, but the rest of this is a little more bare bones for what I like to see, and I think is inferior to the Great Knight. So this one's okay, but I think more niche. And the TMR review, you know, whether it's worth pulling just for the TMR alone, let me help you out. The answer is no. This TMR is terrible, in my opinion. This is a god-awful TMR. It's an armor type number 1, which I don't like because it means you can only equip 1 at a time, and I do not think this is superior to any other armor choice. The buff itself, reaction block rate of 50, is so prevalent everywhere else. Wait a minute. It's so prevalent everywhere else. I've been working on that, guys. I say that word incorrectly. It's prevalent, not prevalent. And I swear to God, I had someone in the comments pointed out to me. I researched it. They were right. I'm working on it. Little quirky fun fact. Reaction block rate is so prevalent everywhere that I don't think this is a unique TMR skill. The slash attack at 25, you can also get many other places. And it's a buff that will repeat itself. So lots of chances for the AI to screw up with this. 2 thumbs down. If I had a third hand, it'd get a 3rd thumbs down. This is a egregiously bad TMR. Now for the job-based vision card eligibility, there's a lot of overlap with Greatsword. It's one of the biggest benefactors of job-based vision cards. Immediately coming to mind are the synergies with Staff Black Mage, Sword Red Mage, and Sword Warrior, and this is primarily unlocked because of Cloud's vision card that's coming out in a couple weeks, where this unit res card with the 60% attack attached to it really gives these teams some huge upside value. Fists and Staff Devout technically have enough that there's some bones to make work too, and there are some other classes that, you know, do have some slight overlap, but I don't think Cloud himself is a hard carry unit, and so I think if you were to put him into one of those teams where the vision cards don't really align all that great, I don't think he's strong enough to compensate for the loss of that, but I still think there's obviously lots of potential future, overlap to be had, where many of these classes have 4 to 5 different vision cards overlapping. But I think these are the easiest ones to use for now. And we get into the general optimization. You know, his sword, the combined sword, I think is the best weapon. It's 20 AoE res pen permanently for it. It's 15 slash attack. You also get 15% magic damage the wider the AoE, and you also get, I think it's 10 AP. He starts off with AP. I do think Save the Queen, though, is another good one, obviously, where Cloud has no innate physical barrier. So having that 20% helps, and it's got the decreased AP consumption, which certainly does help in this AP hungry meta that we're in right now. But special mention on the Cloud cell phone that's coming out. I know there's a lot of text here, but in particular, these bottom three boxes are what Cloud gets. He gets the 15% AoE wide resistance for physical type, so he gets it for both magical and physical based off these two equips, which will get him up to 40% innately. It's reaction block rate of 40 permanently for himself as well, which will get him up to 80 permanently, and then 30% acquired AP and 10 unit res. I think this is a best in slot item for him. There's certainly other options, but I think it's definitely one of them because I think the Maximilian armor, certainly 2 thumbs up. The Alex ring for his accuracy, even though he's got the guaranteed hit, the Alex ring certainly is very helpful in a pinch. Obviously, the pod accessories have their own types of survivability with the agility stats on them too. It's kind of their niche that they add unit res or AoE res while also giving you some agility. From an S perspective, nothing crazy here. These are my de facto favorites for DPS units, but I do think Minotaur is a very good light slash unit that Cloud would do very well with. And I do think he is a potential TMR unit, as we talked about. That second buff with the magical HP barrier, if you don't want that on, I think there's a slew of TMRs here that are very good. I mean, I like Al's shoulder spike here to do the damage regen or damage absorption since he's got none innately. This headband on the very far right is actually the 2P headband. This one is also a regen ability. It's also got reaction block on it, but if you wanted to give him regen for a little bit of self-sustain, he's obviously a candidate for the Veritas of the Wind TMR as well. But also this is the Oberon, the Auspicious TMR. That's a human killer and reduced AP cost as well, and a low-key sneaky favorite of mine. This is the Zidane Zidane TMR. This is a 35% physical barrier and 30% accuracy. No one uses the Zidane TMR, and I think it's slept on. But for a unit that does not have an innate barrier, that's your way to get one. So 2 thumbs up for that. Obviously, there's a slew of other TMR options too, but let's keep going here. The 2 different builds I have here, I have Mono Light and I have Great Sword. This Mono Light team, I intentionally tried to stay with like Mono Light cards and not go into any kind of Great Sword cards. So these are slightly power crept. I'm not saying this is the best build, but if I'm recommending this in my new player build, I want to show that it's at least possible to use some of these older light cards and just to show the stats of what he looks like. I built a team here with the new Lucio unit and Young Helena, where I have Bahamut here for the unit res. We have Dark Bahamut for the AoE res. You have some agility on regular Bahamut too. So, for that third slot, I went with the 50% attack card. That's the Rob Horn card, but certainly a lot of other options there. The bottom line is, I think some other quick things to touch on. I have the cell phone here as the accessories. I did go full HP set for him and the agility set on the right side for Truststones, which we will talk about in 2 slides. But stat-wise, you're looking at 1800 attack, north of 1200 HP, 31 unit res, 30 AoE res, 40 AoE wide res. You're at 50 defense pen here, 88 slash res pen, 20 AoE penetration because of his weapon as well. Modifier wise, you're looking at 186 total modifier. That is very high right out of the box for most units. The effective HP number, a little bit lower than what we're used to seeing. Without that heal back, he's a little bit below where Ashen King Mont is, and many of you have probably seen, you can kill King Mont. He's not like an undefeatable unit. He can die in like 3 to 4 hits. The thing with Cloud is that he's got no heal back though, which is part of Ashen King Mont's survivability, but that's where Cloud's like 25% physical damage reduction comes in. That's where the HP barrier of the magic comes in. So he's a little more brittle than what we might be used to seeing, but you give him a little bit of healing, he's probably going to be just fine. And in the second build here, the Greatsword team, this is just a straight up triple Greatsword team. I'm also using the 2 newly anticipated vision cards for Final Fantasy VII, both the Cloud vision card and the Tifa vision card that comes out with her. Both of these do exceptional things for his stats overall. I mean, luck-wise, going back from prior build to current build, he goes from 444 luck to 495 luck. That's a really nice accuracy bump for him, where his accuracy goes from 321 to 355. So you're talking a pretty good, 30% percent plus hit rate advantage there. The HP slightly less, but his overall effective HP is actually higher because he does have higher AoE resonance build. He's up to 40 instead of the 30 on the prior. He's up to almost 2k attack here in this build. Majority reason because of his vision card and the 60% attack that gives him. But he's got a bunch of chain resistances here. He's still killing it for modifiers overall. It's not the 180, it's a little bit less, but still, you're in that, what is it, 170, 180 range, very, very high. Penetrations, a little bit less on the slash res pen, dropping down to 70 instead of the 88, but that's still very competitive. I have no problem with 70 slash res pen. 15% debuff weakening, very healthy build overall. This is a very, very good team in JP. I have no doubt that there's a lot of things here that will also make it very good in Global. So very happy from the stat perspective. And finally, the Truststones. Left side, I'm just going with the HP set, maybe the crit evade set. I know that sounds crazy. I'm going to do a video on it later. I've always had some copium for this crit evade set, but I think it's starting to come back into the fold as a consideration. But for now, just go with the HP set. Don't overthink it. It's super easy. Just go with HP and luck and 4 different element resistances. I think that's totally fine for Cloud. On the right side, I would go for agility, maybe the aim set, but really agility is just fine. The attack 20%, the defense pen, the slash res pen of 10, the light attack of 10, and then I have the crit rate and the crit damage. The thing is, this is very weapon dependent, because if you look at these other ones I've recommended, that acquired AP of 20%, he technically has it on the cell phone, so you would not get the benefit of it here. So if you're using the cell phone like I had in the recommended build, you don't need the acquired AP of 20%. The Dex of 15, his attacks only scale off his attack stat. They don't look at his dexterity at all, so I'd prefer to just have 10 crit rate rather than 15 dexterity. The accuracy of 10, I'm not that concerned. I don't think it's a major thing for him. Even the reaction block rate, I don't think is strictly necessary either because he's got so much innately. But that's the Cloud review altogether. Obviously a unit to be excited for. I don't think he's a meta shaker, but I think he's a very strong unit for a lot of people to pull on. I think he's going to show some great results here at the turn of the 4th anniversary. I think a lot of people are going to be very happy with the results they see. Those of you that have been building up Greatsword, he is going to fit in absolutely perfectly with them. And those of you building Light, I think he's going to fit in absolutely great with them. So I think both angles, people are going to be very happy. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching as usual, everybody. Good luck pulling in a couple days. I'll talk to you soon.